Welcome to Husch Blackwell's Labor Law Insider Podcast. This is your host, Tom Godar. I've been practicing in the labor law sector for, more than 40 years, and I can tell you that in no time of my practice has labor law had greater changes than in the last 5-6 years. We began the podcast in May of 2021 following the election of President Biden, and elections have consequences, and under the Biden administration, a new National Labor Relations Board with a new general counsel reshaped labor policies, and they were very consequential. During that time, because it was so important to stay on top of labor law issues, the family of Husch Blackwell Labor Law Counsel more than doubled in its coast-to-coast reach to assist our client. Well, we've since had another election. In the January of 2025, President Trump was inaugurated to his second but non-continuous term. And once again, we're seeing significant changes in how the National Labor Relations Board and its appointed members, the GC right now an acting general counsel, and the board members are going to interpret the National Labor Relations Act and its associated laws. So once again, we're continuing a wild ride of labor law. It's not likely to change soon, so buckle up and enjoy the Labor Law Insider Podcast. Welcome to the Labor Law Insider. This is your host, Tom Godar, and I'm really glad that you could join us. I've been practicing in the labor law sector for more than 40 years, and I can tell you that my observation is that in the last 5 to 6 years, we've had some of the greatest changes, the swinging of the pendulum that we've ever experienced in this area. We began this podcast back in May of 2021 after President Biden was elected, and he had pledged to be the most union-friendly president ever, and indeed, he arguably was. And there were significant changes during his tenure under the National Labor Relations Board that he had a chance to influence and appoint, and his general counsel, Wilcox. Well, I think it's been said that elections have consequences, and in January of 2025, President Trump was inaugurated for his second, though non-contiguous term. And in the past year, we've again seen that pendulum swinging. First, there was the appointment of an acting general counsel, but as of January of this year, we have a new general counsel, Crystal Carey, and 2 new members have been confirmed and sworn into the National Labor Relations Board, James Murphy and Scott Meyer. And so the changes we saw beginning with the new administration will continue and perhaps even accelerate under the new board. We think that the Labor Law Insider is going to be just as helpful to you, our friends and clients, as it has been for the past 4 or 5 years. And we're looking forward to continuing with you on this podcast. As I have said, I think each time I recreate an introduction, it's a wild ride of labor law. And once again, I promise you it will be. And I could not welcome a better guest for this Labor Law Insider than a true insider, Terry Potter, one of my partners from our St. Louis Husch Blackwell office, but also a fellow who worked himself in the NLRB as one of their counsel and has been helping employers understand, frankly, how to have excellent employee-employer relationships, which is one of the best union avoidance techniques ever invented, but also what's going on in D.C., what's going on at the regions, what we have seen and what we might anticipate over the next several years under this National Labor Relations Board. Terry is found on virtually every one of what I call the vanity lists that are published out there, best lawyers and best lawyers in Missouri, and this and that. And he's been there, frankly, for a really long time because he deserves to be. While these are vanity lists, sometimes they get it right. And with Terry, they have it right. He's truly one of the finest labor lawyers that any client would be able to bring into their side of the camp. Terry, it's great to have you, and thanks so much for joining us again in the Labor Law Insider. Terry, one of the driving forces of Section 7 of the National Labor Relations Act is labor peace, obviously. And under the Biden board, however, we saw a real difficulty in achieving settlements because the fear that the National Labor Relations Board directors and staff would demand pretty outrageous, in our estimation, components of a settlement agreement. They would ask, for instance, for 100 cents plus on the dollar and some pretty difficult issues in order to negotiate a settled decision for an board charge.
Well, not only that, but I had a situation where we settled a case and my client had an employer rep read the terms of notice, and the board agent, what the union rep and the employees record that situation. That should have never happened. Totally improper. It just got out of control.
Terry, another change that we saw under the Biden administration, which I anticipate will be rolled back significantly, was the breadth of communications by unions that were seen as appropriate, whether it had to do with disparaging employers or certain of the management employees, or saying pretty shocking things at various times, and all found to be appropriate, or at least not improper, because they're protected concerted speech or activities. Among those areas were the really chippy kinds of statements that were made, and they were made in all sorts of contexts, including in the public context.
Well, another one of my big problems is social media, especially in the context of organizing campaigns. I think the board needs to step back and think about how they want to deal with that in terms of union campaigns and what unions can or can't say with respect to employers in terms of the truthfulness. I mean, there's got to be a standard where if they're just making bold-faced lies, that there's a penalty to pay for that. And there isn't right now. And so misinformation gets spread constantly, has a big influence on the outcome of these elections. And the board isn't recognizing that impact and isn't regulating that activity as they should.
So we've talked about compare and contrast in an important way about what we saw under the Wilcox GC board and the Biden board, if you will, and what the merging under a board appointed by President Trump. And you've already identified some of the ways that it affected your practice and our clients' ability to maneuver. At the same time, in spite of what I would have called the most union-friendly administration under Biden, and I hope what I'd call a correction now, the unions did not make huge gains, in my estimation, during the 4 years when they had such a friendly board. They haven't organized any large industries. They haven't recaptured transportation or logistics. Retail still seems largely outside their area. Hospitality, yes, some, but Starbucks seemed to be like their poster child. What do you make of the union's ability or inability to capitalize on a sort of friendly opinion about organized labor and a friendly board during the last 4 years and where we're moving into in 2026?
Well, I think the fact that the economy was strong all those years, we weren't having layoffs, either limited or mass layoffs. That makes a big difference. You know, people weren't afraid of losing their jobs. And that's when the unions normally come in. You know, they feed off the insecurity of the employees. And I totally get that. But, you know, when you have a strong economy, what are you going to tell the employees you can do for them? We're going to change your handbook into a contract and that's it? Or we're going to charge you for it? That doesn't go very far. So I think they have a real uphill battle when the unions do, when the economy's going strong and they're getting appropriate raises, they're getting appropriate benefits, nobody's losing their jobs, and quote, well, they're happy. They're happy employees. And so they don't see a need for a union. I think that is what was happening in the past.
Yes, that is a really great point. How many elections ago was, Terry, you and I can recall when it was Bill Clinton who said, it's the economy, stupid. You know, the economy does make a lot of difference in lots of lives. And yes, it's been more stable in spite of the sense that election turned on uncertainty about the economy a couple of years ago. It hasn't really shifted enough for people to say, I need a different kind of protection, I think. When we're now moving into this era, and what do we need to learn from this in terms of some of the practical ways in which our clients are conducting their business, are rewriting handbooks, are looking at how to hire, orient, discipline, and ultimately discharge employees? What are some of the lessons that are now in better focus now that we've seen a board appointment, a change in the National Labor Relations Board? You're probably through GC memos and ultimately through some decisions, a reeling back of some of the broad strike of the National Labor Relations Board.
It hasn't changed since the first day I became an attorney. It's training. You've got to train supervisors on the basics on human resources. That's the key. You've got to make sure that they're doing the right thing, not only for the company, but for the employees. Because in the long run, the company will pay for it if they've got a supervisor who doesn't understand that and thinks that if they beat up on the employees without cause, that that's not going to have repercussions. It will. It will definitely have repercussions. You're going to have employees who are upset. They're going to slow down in their work. They're going to engage in internal protests, having discord in the workplace. They will, in all likelihood, reach out to a union. Time and time again, usually it's not about money. When organizing takes place, it's seldom about money. It's about how they've been treated by supervision. Time and time again, that's the cause. So if you train your supervisors to be good supervisors, then you eliminate high probability of being organized.
Well, in my estimation, transparent communication, selecting the right people in the first place, training them, giving them resources pays huge dividends. And those of you who haven't had a chance to look at the last podcast that we did on the Labor Law Insider, it's worth a click. We had Liz Filter, one of my favorite CEOs of a growing organization, talk about her sense of servant leadership. But it's not just for the CEO. She said she wants to try to inculcate that in all of her employees, that they're all there to serve rather than to, lord it over. And that's, of course, really important for those who are in the management HR sort of side of the place. Recently, a client, and this is happening, 100 times a month for us, is saying, hey, take a look at our handbook. It's time to look at it. There's been changes. What do we do? And so this client happens to, in this particular side of their business, has 5 different locations in 5 different states. So we're looking at it. And of course, we're going to pay attention to state law in various states. And some of the things that are just rolling out now through the GC and acting GC memos and so forth tell us that there's a new sheriff. How do we help the clients say, is it time to take a look at the handbook review? Because quite honestly, a year ago, I said, hold on, let's just, limp along and see where this is going. In this sort of how you're selecting your policies and importantly, your policy enforcement, what kind of advice should we be helping our clients with?
Well, here's my dilemma. If you speak to any VP of HR, one of the things that they complain about is their attorneys constantly telling them they need to change their handbook. If they change their handbook as often as we all keep sending out memos to them saying you need to make this change, they wouldn't be doing anything else. And they really get upset over us suggesting that action. So I think as counselors to these clients, we have to be careful we don't overdo it and overstate it. On the other hand, that doesn't mean that we can't provide them guidance regarding changes in the law and say, we'll leave it up to you as to when you make these changes, but this one is less critical, but this one is more critical. Give a hierarchy of what's important, what should be changed first, and why. But yeah, I've heard so many VPs of HR go, look, I'm not going to change my handbook again. This is crazy. That's all I'm doing. And we have all these facilities throughout the U.S. We turn around and change it, and we got to train. We're not getting anything else done. It doesn't make any sense. So you've got to have your priorities.
So as we move now into 2026, a more stabilized National Labor Relations Board, you've already, I think, given us some great thoughts about training, about being wise in terms of how you approach the policies, but don't let it shake your world every time a new decision comes out. Any sort of helpful thoughts as our clients are looking at the world on a more, moderated labor policy as explained by the National Labor Relations Board?
Well, again, keep up to date on the law. There's so many resources out there for everyone to utilize, not only our blogs and these podcasts, but a lot of other sources out there. Keep your ears and eyes open. And 2, follow it up and share that information throughout your organization as needed. Again, best way to prevent either sexual harassment claims, sex discrimination claims, anything in terms of DOL investigations is pay attention to what you're doing and check up on it in terms of, is this still the standard? Because inertia takes over. I know how it is. You get busy. Inertia takes over and you don't have time to see whether or not, well, are we paying appropriately under the new wage and hour guidelines? Again, there's a lot of resources out there, and you have someone who's checking on those, or if you just reach out to us, say, hey, can you give me a quick overview of the changes in the last year? We can easily do that in both state and federal law, and they can just go through that checklist. Yeah, we're good. We'll wait till next year. We'll talk to you then. Doesn't take that much effort.
I love that, and I couldn't agree more. And I'll just add one thing that has little to do exactly with the law. One of the first things you or I ask when we come in and there's been a petition filed or we're hearing rumblings of a union campaign is, tell us what kind of communication methods you already have set up. And when they say not many, or yeah, we recognize employees' birthdays or something like that. So now our communications are going to look like they're reactionary as opposed to the regular piece. And so I've often suggested to employers that they have transparent communications that builds trust. If you have a trusted place and the economy goes left or right, then you say, hey, the economy is going left or right, so we might have to make some adjustments. You have some trust rather than, just shooting from the hip. I remember going into a client's office. They were concerned about union organizing. They went through the presentation the CEO was going to have for the outside board and the ownership. And I went through slide by slide of what the board meeting was going to be presented on the chief executive's report. And I said, when are you going to share that with the employees? He looked at me like I had a third eye. I said, which of these slides are so damned important that you couldn't share it with your employees? It's so confidential, telling them about the next secret design of expanding or contracting the business that you don't want anybody to know about. And he could only point to a couple. I said, why don't you share that information? Build that lane of trust with your employees. Nothing illegal about it. Let them have it. Tell them the truth. You can put some varnish on it because that we always communicate with some varnish, but not so much that people don't believe that they're just getting shined on. So between staying up to date with what is appropriate and creating a trust environment to your employees, it's pretty hard for the unions to gain a toehold, isn't it?
Yes. And you make a good point regarding communication. In fact, it brings up something I experienced when my daughter was working for Walmart in their corporate office. In Walmart, every Saturday morning, a meeting in their corporate office that all employees are welcome to attend. In fact, it's really thought that you should at least attend 2 out of the 4 of the month. And they go over in detail the financials of the company and changes in policy and what their marketing is. They share all kinds of information. I was so impressed by that. So impressed. I'm not talking about the white collar folks coming to these meetings. Hey, it's from the janitor to the CFO. And trust me, the people speaking aren't low level either. The CFO gives these presentations. Very impressive. So smart.
Well, on the other side, I just talked to a younger woman who works at a name brand that I won't mention. I said, so what do you know about where your pathway is? What have you learned about what the opportunities might be, how you're doing, how you'd get those? She looked at me again like I'd never heard that kind of communication. I said, so you don't talk about that with your supervisor, where it is that you might fit in, what kind of activities you should be engaged in now to prepare yourself for that next level of activity? And said, no one's ever talked to me about that. I thought, boy, what a missed opportunity to grow your company in a way that's even more robust. This company has seen plenty of growth. I'm not trying to badmouth it, but in that particular region, they're just not doing the thing that would make sense to most of us who watch really great companies do some really great stuff. Well, Terry, this has been fun to talk with you and just get a start in 2026 of what it might look like and what it might look like by 2027 and beyond. So I thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy practice to join us as a labor law insider.
Good talking with you, Tom.
Thanks. And thank you for joining us. If you like the episode, certainly let others know. And we'll see you again soon on the Labor Law Insider.